Yesterday we saw Jesus ride into Jerusalem, drawing a crowd. He entered the temple, looked around, and then he left. Today we'll continue the story at Mark chapter 11, verse 12. On the following day, when they came from Bethany, he was hungry. And seeing in the distance a fig tree in leaf, he went to see if he could find anything on it. When he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for it was not the season for figs. And he said to it, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." And his disciples heard it. And they came to Jerusalem. And he entered the temple and began to drive out those who sold and those who bought in the temple. And he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold pigeons. And he would not allow anyone to carry anything through the temple. And he was teaching and saying to them, "Is it not written, 'My house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations'? But you have made it a den of robbers." And the chief priests and the scribes heard it and were seeking a way to destroy him, for they feared him, because all the crowd was astonished at his teaching. And when evening came, they went out of the city. The word of the Lord. Our story begins on the following day after Jesus rides into Jerusalem. This would be Monday of Jesus' last week on earth. To think that Jesus talks to a fig tree and expects it to hear him, that he would curse it for not bearing figs out of season, stretches the imagination past reality. So it will help us to hear what the first hearers of this story heard. They would have been familiar with the symbolism that Mark uses. You see, the fig tree represents the nation of Israel, and a fig would represent then a godly person within Israel. Jesus seeks to find a godly person here in the nation of Israel, and he finds none. Although they have had thousands of years with the scriptures, they have the law that Moses gave them, and they have the temple in which to worship, he finds only a veneer of religion. After the fig tree, perhaps there is one more place to look: the temple, God's dwelling place. One would expect to find here in the temple the faithful, would he not, or would she not? The devout, the learned, and perhaps they are there, but their hearts are not. Jesus finds instead business as usual. Not business as usual for the temple, but business as usual for the economic world outside the temple. There is buying and selling and exchange of money. There are cattle being bought and sold. There are monies being changed so that the temple tax can be paid. He finds a bazaar instead of worship. And I wonder, what would Jesus think of Starbucks in the foyer? And I have walked into more than a few churches where the first thing you see is a storefront. Well, here's what Jesus did 2,000 years ago. He drove them all out. He overturned their tables. He upset their money times. It must have been quite a sight. I'd love to have seen it. I'd love to have seen the cattle running and bellowing. I'd love to see the men in robes chasing after them, yelling and cursing. I'd love to see the clouds of dust, and as one evangelist has it, the crack of the whip. Here we have the temple that Herod built, 40 acres, and Jesus empties it out. Why in the world would he do that? After all, these were good things. People needed to buy animals to present their sacrifices. People needed to change their money so they could pay the temple tax. It was quite convenient. They didn't have to stop along the way. It was all right there. I wish I had more time to expand this, but we can read these stories as acted out parables. And they tell us something very, very important. They are very much like the story of water into wine, where old jars are emptied out and repurposed. Mark is telling us, through these symbols, that Jesus himself is the temple of God. He is telling us that through his whole gospel that Jesus is God. Jesus is the dwelling of God with humanity. Or again, Jesus is a temple of God. And where this has import for us today is that as we come to faith in Jesus, we are in union with him, and we too become a dwelling place for God, visible to the whole world. And now may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord look upon you with graciousness and give you peace.